ever made a mistake and thought to yourself, okay, I learned my lesson, I will not do that again? Only to one day be asking yourself, why did I do that again? You know, one of the things about being human is that we are fallible, that we are broken. And even as we try to live a life of faith, we often find that mistakes that we've made are mistakes that we repeat. And sometimes in our minds, a repeated mistake, once, God will probably show us grace and mercy. But twice, after we've made the same mistake twice, God's probably done with us. Or 3 times, 4 times. And what we see as we study this account from the life of Abraham is that even in our repeated failures, God still shows grace and mercy. We could put it this way: God gives grace to repeat offenders. And that's good news for me because I'm a repeat offender. And I'm guessing that that's good news for you because you're probably a repeat offender as well. And so we come to this story and we see Abraham making the same mistake that he made at the very beginning. We come pretty close to the end, and Abraham still is making the same foolish, sinful choice, and God is once again rescuing him. And this time he doesn't just rescue him, he actually goes above and beyond and works through him. One of the things that we've been seeing in the life of Abraham is that God works in the life of Abraham to bring about greater faith in God, to what we might call personal sanctification. But he's also working through Abraham to bring blessing to the nations. And in this story, we see both of these things. We see God working in Abraham, and we also see God preserving him so that the promised seed, the son Isaac, and ultimately Jesus, can come through Abraham. But also the promise at the beginning that all of the nations would be blessed through him and his descendants. We see just a small taste of that here in this story. We're in Genesis chapter 20, and we're looking at Abraham and his sinful deception of Abimelech. We find that Abraham is now living in Gerar, which is a city in the southern portion of Canaan. And that means that Abraham is once again an alien, kind of wandering about in a strange land and somewhat at the mercy of the locals. We'll find out later that Abimelech seems to be connected with the Philistines. And so this is the people group that will one day become quite a challenge for Israel. But right now, at least, there seems to be some good rapport between them. And they walk into the area. And then once again in verse 2, we read, "And Abraham said of Sarai his wife, 'She is my sister.' And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah." And we're probably getting a sense of deja vu if you've been going through this series. This is exactly what Abraham did in Egypt with Pharaoh. "Oh, she's my sister. Here, you can take her." And, the first time he did that, it didn't go well. And not just for Abraham, it didn't go well for all of Egypt. Remember, when we went through that, we talked about the fact that in Genesis, the first part of Genesis 12, Abraham is told he would be a blessing. By the end of Genesis 12, Abraham has caused pain and misery for the Egyptians. It's the opposite of being a blessing. Now, this choice by Abraham is an especially foolish decision. And so, if you're teaching this as a small group, you'll notice that there's a question: why might this be an especially foolish choice for Abraham? And then the paragraph after that kind of lists some of those reasons off. And so I'll do this sometimes where I'm trying to get everybody talking, but I don't want to just, leave it hanging. So, because you might have groups say, I don't know, why is it? Did we miss anything? Well, here's at least a few of the reasons that I could think of, and there may be more. First, he's seen what God has done to other nations that dare mess with his wife. He's seen what happened to Egypt, that God did to Egypt because of Abraham's lie. So that means Abraham is now knowingly exposing the Philistines and Abimelech and his people to the judgment of God, and they haven't knowingly done anything wrong. Second, Abraham has seen God be faithful to him over and over in his wanderings, and yet once again he finds himself feeling the need to lie because he thinks that if he doesn't lie, God might not take care of me this time, it would seem. Finally, we see that God has promised Abraham, he's just promised him in Genesis 18, that within 1 year's time, he's going to have a son. And now, Sarah is not living with him. Well, how is all of this going to work together? What in the world is going to happen? And I think there's some good application that we can make there. Why is Abraham not trusting God? Why is he still not trusting God? What might be some of the excuses that Abraham would have used to justify, well, sweetheart, it's probably better that we once again just say that you're my sister. And how might that perhaps be more like us than we would like to admit? How even after God has come through for us, time after time after time after time, we find ourselves in the position where we say, well, yeah, but I don't know if he's going to come through for me in this instance as well. So what happens here? Well, we get a little bit more detail than we do with Abraham and Pharaoh and God. God comes to Abimelech, and we get the details of the dream, and it's kind of an interesting account of God warning Abimelech. God comes to him and essentially says, you're a dead man because you have taken the wife of another man. And Abimelech is just beside himself. And you can almost hear like the barrage of questions where he's very, very defensive, and understandably so, right? He says here, Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, wilt thou also slay a righteous nation? Said he not unto me, she is my sister, and even she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and the innocency of my hands, I've done this. He's just falling over himself. God, I really didn't know. And so God tells Abimelech, yes, I know. I know that what you did was done in the innocency, and that's why I've kept you from sinning against me. I didn't suffer, or that word there means I didn't allow you to touch her. So, what happens? Well, what happens is Abimelech goes out and he tells all of his servants what happened. And note their response, because this is going to be really important. You got to pay attention to the details in these stories. Note what happens and what Abraham says later, okay? So Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all his servants and told them all these things in their ears. And the men were sore afraid. They were very, very fearful after they hear about this dream that Abimelech has had. And God tells Abimelech essentially, go and get Abraham. He will pray for me, or he will pray for you, and I will heal you. And so then we have the confrontation, right? Abimelech goes to Abraham, and he asks Abraham, Abraham, what have you done? And once again, you can hear that Abimelech is just angry. He says, what sawest thou that thou hast done this? Verse 9. He said, what hast thou done unto us? And what have I offended thee, that thou hast brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? Thou hast done deeds that ought not to be done. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, what sawest thou that thou hast done this thing? Abimelech is trying to help Abraham realize that the choices that Abraham has made are very self-focused. And that as a result of that, Abimelech and his people are in great trouble. They're at a place where they're under the judgment of God because of Abraham's choices. So often, if we're not careful, we can make sinful, selfish choices, and we forget that those sinful, selfish choices are going to impact others. And so Abraham here is acting completely in self-focus, and he doesn't think about others. Now, notice what Abraham says here. And again, this is another place where I ask you and your group to kind of study it out and look through it and then go through some of the reasons. But what is the arguments that Abraham gives? Well, there's several of them. First of all, he kind of makes a backhanded accusation. Did you catch that there in verse 11? And Abraham said, because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place. Now, that's a little bit insulting. A little bit. That's very insulting. He comes to this man Abimelech and he says, well, I figured you guys don't really care what God thinks. And it's interesting the way he puts it. He said, I didn't think there was a fear of God in this place. Well, Abraham, apparently you were completely wrong. Remember earlier when Abimelech tells his servants what happened, what dream he had? What was their response? They were sore afraid. They were very afraid. There was a fear of God in the place. But he goes on, he says, well, what I said, it wasn't all false. He said, essentially, Sarah is my half-sister. We share one parent, but not the other. Now, this is the kind of thing you would say that makes you feel a little bit better about what you did, but doesn't actually make what you did any better. Abimelech and his entire kingdom had believed that he and Sarah were only siblings, which is obviously not true. And then finally, Abraham explains that this is what he's always done. And of all the reasons that Abraham gives, this is probably the worst, right? Abraham says, well, everywhere I go, I've just told Sarah, hey, tell everyone you're my sister, okay? Bad ideas aren't better because we do them more frequently. In other words, Abraham says, well, I kind of did this everywhere. Well, that makes it even worse. What Abraham is doing is a terrible idea, and it doesn't make things any better that he did it frequently. What Abraham is doing here, none of these excuses really hold water. We've already seen the people fear God. The fact that it was only half untrue, he deceived the people. All the people thought, oh, this is his sister. And that's all they thought. And Abraham knew it, and that's what Abraham wanted them to think. And Abraham was doing this everywhere he went. All of these are bad excuses. And yet, we do the same thing, don't we? We make sinful decisions. We make wrong choices. And what do? We start throwing up excuses. And one of the, as wrong as that is, and it is wrong, one of the incredible things about this story is even with Abraham and his really bad excuses, God continues to show grace and mercy to Abraham, even despite his proud deflection here. And so we continue on and we see that there is, in this story, a very grace-filled ending, a happy ending. First, Abimelech makes restitution. He knows that he's got a death sentence hanging over his head, and so he gives flocks and herds to Abraham to compensate him for taking his wife. Now that's kind of one of the things Pharaoh did, right? Remember, Pharaoh gave him all of these flocks and all of these herds. Then he tells Abraham, hey, you know what? Go settle wherever you want. The best part of the land. Okay? And then finally, there's kind of an interesting back and forth here. In verse 16, he says, and unto Sarah he said, behold, I have given thy brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, he is to thee a covering of the eyes. It also could be translated, it is to thee a covering of the eyes. Thus she was reproved. And that word reproved could also be vindicated, declared as being pure. And the idea seems to be here that Abimelech is making sure everybody knows, and it's very public, I did not have relations with this woman in any way. In fact, he tells God that. He said, and God tells him that, I kept you from touching her. There's been nothing untoward or inappropriate between them. He brought her into the house, but the relationship was never consummated. And Abimelech is vindicating her in front of everyone, saying, I did not sleep with this woman. And again, that's really important because in the very next chapter, we're going to be reading that Isaac is born. And so the question is, well, okay, who's Isaac's father? And Abimelech is making it very clear in this chapter, it is not me. And that answers the question right there. Why is it important for the story that Abimelech makes clear that nothing inappropriate happened between himself and Sarah? Well, just look at chapter 21. Isaac is just about to be born. And so it's important for us as the reader, and it was important for people at the time to know this really is Abraham's son. And then we see Abraham prays for Abimelech. And finally, we see Abraham becoming the blessing to the people that he was always intended to be. Abimelech and his people are once again able to have children. And so we see that Abraham's prayer actually makes them fruitful. And this is kind of interesting because what God has done here is he's taken a very bizarre set of circumstances. And through that set of circumstances, he has, through Abraham's own sinful choices, brought Abraham to the point where he's fulfilling what God wanted him to do, that through him, through his prayers, the nations are being blessed. This account from the life of Abraham is a powerful, humbling story of God's goodness, grace, and mercy, and the life of Abraham in the city of Gerar. But more than that, it's a beautiful reminder to us that even when we make mistakes, and even when we make those same mistakes again and again and again, God is willing to forgive. God is willing to help us. And even in the midst of our mistakes, God can bring fruitfulness and blessing. Now, of course, this does not mean that we shouldn't care about our sins or that it really doesn't matter. Rather, we should walk away from a story like this and think to ourselves, wow, what an overwhelmingly good God we serve. That even when I fail him, he doesn't fail me. And even when I'm untrue to him, and even when I don't trust him like I should, he is still able to do increasingly, abundantly above all that I could ask or think. And so a story like this ought to create gratitude and worship in our hearts as we consider the great God we serve and the fact that God gives grace to repeat offenders. Thank you for teaching these lessons and for watching these videos. I look forward to seeing you next time.